Carter Finn had never expected his shabby rental house to be lit up at midnight. When he pushed the door open, the scent of soap filled the living room. The floor gleamed clean, and his daughter's toys were neatly arranged. And in the middle of the small kitchen, a woman in an expensive white blouse knelt on the floor, scrubbing. When Carter froze in recognition that this was Venessa Hart, the powerful CEO who had cost him everything. She looked up, her voice trembling as she spoke a single sentence that shattered his heart. Carter Finn was 36 years old, a single father who made his living as an electrician and took odd jobs at night. He was a quiet man, the kind who spoke only when necessary, whose silence carried more weight than most people's words. His self-respect ran deep, not the fragile kind that crumbled under pressure, but the quiet dignity of someone who had lost everything and still refused to beg. Every decision he made, every dollar he earned, every minute he had left after exhaustion, he gave to his daughter. Matilda came first. Always. Matilda Finn was 7 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and a gentleness that made adults uncomfortable, as if she understood too much for her age. She was the kind of child who thanked him for dinner even when it was just pasta again, who folded her own clothes without being asked, who watched him carefully when he thought she wasn't looking. She knew when to be quiet. She knew when her father needed space. And she never, ever, asked why they lived the way they did. Their home was a small rental on the edge of town, the kind of place where the pipes rattled and the heater only worked on good days. The carpet was worn thin, the furniture mismatched, the kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to stand in. But it was clean. Carter made sure of that. And it was full of love, the kind that didn't need words, the kind that lived in small gestures. A hand on Matilda's head before bed, her drawing taped to the refrigerator, the way he always saved the last slice of bread for her. But beneath the surface of their quiet life, Carter carried something heavy. He had once been an engineer, a good one, the kind companies competed to hire. He had worn tailored shirts and worked in glass towers, and believed that competence mattered, that hard work was rewarded, that the system was fair. He had been young enough to believe those things. And then, 6 years ago, everything had collapsed. One decision, one signature, one person with power had decided his fate, and he had been powerless to stop it. Now, Carter worked with his hands. He fixed broken wiring in basements. He repaired appliances for people who paid him in cash. He took overnight shifts at warehouses when the bills piled too high. He never complained. He never explained. But deep inside, he carried an obsession, a wound that had never healed. He hated the wealthy. Not the casual distaste of someone who envied success, but the cold, visceral hatred of someone who had been crushed by people who never even knew his name. And among all of them, CEOs were the worst. They sat in their towers, made their decisions, destroyed lives with a pen stroke, and never looked back. Carter had no idea that one of them was about to kneel in his kitchen. Venessa Hart was 34 years old, and the world knew her as a woman made of steel. She was the CEO of one of the country's fastest-growing tech corporations, the kind of company that made headlines and shaped industries. Her face appeared in magazines under titles like The Woman Who Never Sleeps and Leading Without Compromise. Journalists called her brilliant, ruthless, unstoppable. Her employees called her demanding. Her board called her indispensable. And she wore all of it like armor, because armor was the only thing keeping her together. On the outside, Venessa Hart was everything a modern CEO should be. She was sharp, controlled, elegant in tailored suits that cost more than most people's rent. She gave speeches about innovation and disruption. She made decisions worth millions before most people finished their morning coffee. She had climbed higher and faster than almost anyone in her field, and she had done it without apology. People envied her. People feared her. No one really knew her. But inside, Venessa Hart was suffocating. The pressure was constant, a weight that never lifted, a voice that never stopped asking if she was enough, if she had done enough, if she could keep doing this before something inside her finally broke. She was lonely in a way that money couldn't fix, surrounded by people who needed things from her but never knew her. And beneath all of that, Deeper than the exhaustion and the isolation was guilt. A guilt without a name, without a face, that followed her like a shadow she couldn't escape. She had made many decisions in her career. Some had been brilliant. Some had been ruthless. One had been unforgivable. 6 years ago, Venessa Hart had been younger, hungrier, clawing her way toward the executive suite. She had been part of a major tech project, the kind that could make or break careers, that had investors and boards watching every move. Carter Finn had been on that project too. He had been one of the engineers, talented, dedicated, the kind of person who stayed late and caught problems before they became disasters. He had been good at his job. Everyone knew it. And then something went wrong. An error in the documentation, a miscalculation that could have cost the company millions, a mistake that needed a name attached to it. The board wanted accountability. The investors wanted blood. And Venessa, still climbing, still proving herself, had been the one to sign the final report. She had reviewed the paperwork. She had seen the inconsistencies. She had known with the cold clarity that came from years of training that Carter Finn was not the one responsible. But Carter Finn was expendable, and Venessa Hart's career was not. She had signed her name. She had let the report stand. She had watched as Carter was called into a conference room, as his access was revoked, as security walked him out with a box of his belongings. She had watched from her office window as he stood in the parking lot, alone, holding that box, looking up at the building like he couldn't understand what had just happened. And she had turned away. She had gone back to work. She had told herself it was necessary, that it was business, that someone always paid the price. Carter lost his job. He lost his reputation. No one would hire him after that, not in his field, not with that mark on his record. His wife left 3 months later, unable to handle the shame, the uncertainty, the man her husband had become. She took nothing but her own clothes and walked out the door, leaving Matilda behind because even she knew that Carter was the only parent who would never abandon their daughter. And Carter, broken and betrayed and drowning, had never known the whole truth. He thought he had failed. He thought he deserved it. Venessa Hart knew better, and for 6 years, she had lived with that knowledge. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Carter finally trudged up the cracked walkway to his house. His back ached from crawling through tight spaces all evening, fixing wiring in a restaurant basement that should have been condemned years ago. His hands smelled like copper and dust. His eyes burned from exhaustion. All he wanted was to check on Matilda, maybe eat something cold from the refrigerator, and collapse into bed for 4 hours before the next shift. But the lights were on. Not just the porch light he always left burning, but the warm glow from inside, visible through the thin curtains. Carter stopped on the walkway, his keys halfway to the lock, his mind suddenly sharp despite the exhaustion. Matilda never turned on extra lights. She knew better. They couldn't afford it. He opened the door slowly, ready for anything. A break-in. A fire. Something wrong. But what he saw made him freeze completely. The living room was spotless. The toys that had been scattered across the floor that morning were now organized in Matilda's basket. The blankets that usually draped over the couch were folded neatly. The floor, which he had not had time to mop in 2 weeks, gleamed dully in the lamplight. And there was a smell, not the usual mix of old building and whatever they'd had for dinner, but the clean, sharp scent of soap and disinfectant. Carter's heart hammered. He moved forward, his work boots silent on the clean floor, every muscle tense. The kitchen light was on. He could hear water running, the soft scrape of something against tile. And then he saw her. A woman knelt on his kitchen floor, a bucket of soapy water beside her, a scrub brush in her hands. She wore simple jeans and a white blouse that probably cost more than Carter's monthly rent, though the sleeves were rolled up and the fabric was damp in places. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her hands moved in steady, deliberate circles, scrubbing grout that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. And when she sensed his presence and looked up, Carter's entire world stopped. Venessa Hart died. He knew that face. He had seen it in nightmares and in news articles, in memories that surfaced when he couldn't sleep, in the darkest moments when he wondered why his life had fallen apart. She looked different without the makeup and the expensive suit, smaller somehow, more human. But it was unmistakably her, the woman who had signed his death warrant, the woman who had never looked back. And she was kneeling on his kitchen floor, scrubbing. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and terrible, filled with 6 years of wreckage. Venessa's hands had stopped moving. The brush hung forgotten in her grip. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and Carter realized with a shock that she had been crying. Not the delicate tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the raw, exhausted crying of someone who had finally run out of strength. She didn't stand up. She didn't explain. She just knelt there, water dripping from her hands, looking at him with an expression that Carter couldn't name but felt in his chest like a physical blow. "You," he finally said. His voice came out rough, barely more than a whisper. "What are you doing in my house?" Venessa Hart took a shaking breath. She set down the brush carefully, as if it mattered, as if anything about this moment could be controlled. And then, still kneeling, she spoke. "I came to clean," she said. Her voice was nothing like the confident, commanding tone he remembered from presentations and interviews. It was small, broken, because I owe you more than I can ever repay. And I didn't know where else to start. Carter's legs felt weak. He leaned against the doorframe, his mind trying to process what was happening, trying to understand how the woman who had destroyed his life was now scrubbing his kitchen floor in the middle of the night. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. "How did you even get in here?" he asked. "The landlord," Venessa said quietly. "I found him. I told him I was a friend. I paid him 3 months of your rent to let me in tonight." She paused, then added, "I paid him 6 months total, so you don't have to worry about it for a while." Carter's jaw tightened. "I don't want your money. I know," Venessa said. "But I'm giving it anyway. Because it's not about what you want. It's about what I owe." She looked down at her hands, at the raw, reddened skin from hours of scrubbing. "I owe you 6 years. I owe you everything you lost. And I know I can never give that back, but I had to try something. Even if it's just this." Carter stared at her. His mind was a storm of anger and confusion, and something he couldn't quite name, something that felt dangerously close to the grief he had buried years ago. He wanted to yell. He wanted to throw her out. He wanted to demand answers, explanations, reasons why she thought showing up here in the middle of the night with a bucket and a guilty conscience could possibly fix anything. But before he could speak, Venessa Hart did something that shattered what was left of his composure. She shifted forward on her knees, moving closer to where he stood, and then she bowed her head. Not a nod, not a gesture, but a full, deliberate lowering of her head in a posture of complete submission. "Carter Finn," she said, and her voice broke on his name. "I need to tell you the truth. And I need you to know that I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But you deserve to hear this from me." Carter's throat felt tight. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. Venessa raised her head just enough to look at him, tears streaming openly down her face now. "6 years ago, you were blamed for something you didn't do. Everyone knows that story. But what you don't know is that I knew. From the beginning. I reviewed the reports. I saw the real source of the error. And I could have stopped it. I could have told the truth. But I didn't." The words hung in the air like smoke. Carter felt like he was falling, like the floor had disappeared beneath him. "I chose my career over your life," Venessa continued, each word seeming to cost her something. "I told myself it was necessary, that it was just business, that someone had to take the blame, and it might as well be someone who couldn't fight back. I told myself a lot of things. And then I went back to my office and my meetings and my promotions. And I tried very hard not to think about what happened to you." She stopped, her breath hitching. "But I did think about it. Every day. I thought about you standing in that parking lot with a box of your things, looking like your entire world had just ended. Because it had. And it was my fault. Carter's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against the doorframe, anchoring himself, because if he didn't, he might collapse or lunge forward, or do something he couldn't take back. My wife left, he said, his voice raw. Did you know that? Venessa closed her eyes. I found out later, because of what you did, because I couldn't find work, because she couldn't handle being married to a failure. The words tasted like poison. She left our daughter. Matilda was 2 years old, and her mother walked away because I lost everything. I know, Venessa whispered. You don't know anything, Carter said, and now his voice was rising, all the rage and pain and grief he had buried for 6 years, finally breaking free. You don't know what it's like to explain to a child why they can't have new shoes. Why they eat pasta every night. Why their father works 3 jobs and still can't make rent. You don't know what it's like to hate yourself so much you can barely look in the mirror. Because you think you failed. You think you weren't good enough. You think you deserved it. Venessa was openly sobbing now, but she didn't look away. She held his gaze, letting him see her break, letting him see the guilt that had been eating her alive for years. You're right, she said. I don't know. But I should have. I should have thought about that before I signed my name. I should have thought about your daughter. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I destroyed your life. And I destroyed hers too. And there's nothing I can do that will ever make that right. Carter felt something crack inside him. Something that had been holding him together for so long, he'd forgotten it was there. He slid down the doorframe until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, and for the first time in years he cried. Not the silent tears he had shed alone in the dark, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. Venessa didn't move. She stayed where she was, kneeling on his kitchen floor, letting him break apart, offering no comfort because she knew she had no right to offer anything. Daddy? The small, sleepy voice cut through everything. Both adults looked up sharply. Matilda stood in the doorway of her bedroom, wearing her faded pajamas, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand, her dark eyes wide and confused. She looked at her father, tears on his face, and then at the strange woman kneeling on their kitchen floor. Who are you? Matilda asked Venessa, her voice soft but curious. Venessa wiped her face quickly, trying to compose herself, trying to be something other than the mess of guilt and grief she had become. She started, then stopped. I'm someone who made a mistake, a very big mistake. Matilda studied her for a long moment with the unnervingly direct gaze of a child who had learned to read adults too well. Are you the cleaning lady? Despite everything, despite the weight of the moment, Venessa let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Yes, she said. I suppose I am. I came to clean your house. Matilda looked around the spotless living room, then back at Venessa. You did a good job, she said simply. Then she walked over to Carter and climbed into his lap, fitting herself against his chest the way she always did when he was sad. It's okay, Daddy, she said, patting his arm. We can pay the cleaning lady. I have $3 in my piggy bank. The innocence of it, the pure, guileless generosity of a 7-year-old offering her entire savings to help her father, broke something in Venessa that all the guilt and shame had not been able to touch. She covered her face with her hands and wept, her shoulders shaking. All the careful control she had maintained for years finally, completely gone. Matilda watched her with solemn eyes. Why's the cleaning lady crying? She asked Carter. Carter held his daughter close, his chin resting on top of her head, and for a moment he couldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier than he expected. Because sometimes, he said carefully, people realize they've hurt someone, and it makes them very sad. Did she hurt you? Yes, Carter said. There was no point in lying. A long time ago. Matilda thought about this for a moment, then looked at Venessa again. Did you say sorry? Venessa lowered her hands. Her face was blotchy and red, her eyes swollen, all trace of the polished CEO gone. She looked at this little girl who didn't know her, who had no reason to care about her pain, and she nodded. "I'm trying to," she said. "But I don't think sorry is enough. Sorry is where you start," Matilda said with the simple wisdom of a child. "Then you have to do something nice. That's what my teacher says." "I don't think your father wants anything from me," Venessa said quietly. Carter was silent. Because Matilda was right, in her childlike way. Sorry was where you started. But what came after? What could possibly come after this? The three of them sat there in the quiet house. The child and the broken father and the CEO who had fallen from grace. And the silence was no longer angry but something else. Something uncertain. Something that might have been the very beginning of something neither adult had expected. Over the following days, Venessa Hart did something that shocked everyone who knew her. She took a leave of absence from her company. She told her board she needed time for personal matters, a phrase so vague that it sent the business press into a frenzy of speculation. Was she sick? Was there a scandal? Was she being forced out? None of them guessed the truth. That she was spending her days in a shabby rental house on the edge of town, cleaning and cooking and doing laundry for a man who could barely look at her. That she was trying to learn how to be useful in ways that had nothing to do with strategy or profit margins. That she was trying to atone. Carter let her. He didn't know why, exactly. Part of it was shock. The surreal nature of having Venessa Hart wash his dishes and fold his daughter's clothes. Part of it was anger. The dark satisfaction of seeing someone who had everything reduced to scrubbing floors. But there was something else too. Something he didn't want to examine too closely. A small, treacherous part of him that recognized the enormity of what she was doing. The courage it took to face what she had done. To show up day after day, knowing she would never be welcomed, never be forgiven. Venessa never offered him money. Never suggested a job. She seemed to understand that those things would be insults, attempts to buy her way out of guilt. Instead, she offered her hands, her time, her presence. She learned Matilda's schedule and made sure there was dinner ready when Carter got home from work. She noticed when the bathroom faucet leaked and fixed it herself, watching online tutorials until she got it right. She was there, and she was quiet, and she never asked for anything in return. "Why are you really doing this?" Carter asked one evening, watching her fold laundry at his kitchen table. Venessa's hands stilled. "Because I need you to know it was real," she said finally. "What I did to you, the consequences were real, and my guilt is real. And I can't just write a check and walk away feeling like I've done something." She looked up at him. "I need to feel what I took from you, even just a fraction of it." "You'll never feel it," Carter said. "You can walk away anytime. I couldn't." "I know," Venessa said. "But I'm not walking away, not until you tell me to." He didn't tell her to leave. He didn't understand why, but he didn't. Meanwhile, Venessa had done something else. Something that would have consequences neither of them could predict. She had gone to her company's board of directors and demanded a full internal investigation into the incident from 6 years ago. She had provided documentation, emails, evidence that had been buried. She had named names. And she had made it clear that she was prepared to accept whatever judgment came from it. The investigation was swift and brutal. Within 2 weeks, the truth came out. The real source of the error, the people who had known and covered it up, the systematic failure that had allowed an innocent man to be sacrificed. Carter Finn's name was cleared. Officially, completely, with apologies from executives who had long since moved on to other companies. But the cost was high. The people who had benefited from Carter's downfall were exposed, some of them fired, others facing legal consequences. The company's reputation took a hit. And Venessa Hart, who had led the charge for truth despite knowing it would destroy her, faced the harshest judgment of all. The board called a meeting. They told her she would need to step down as CEO. That the company needed new leadership to recover from this scandal. That her willingness to come forward was admirable. But her initial silence was unforgivable. She listened to all of it without argument, without defense. And then she signed her resignation, effective immediately. The business press had a field day. Hart steps down amid ethics scandal, Tech CEO resigns after cover-up revealed. The articles were everywhere, dissecting her career, questioning every decision she'd ever made, speculating about what had really happened. Her name, which had once been synonymous with success, was now associated with shame. But Venessa felt something unexpected. Relief. For the first time in 6 years, she could breathe. When she told Carter, he was standing in his kitchen making coffee, the morning routine that had somehow come to include her presence. She said the words simply, without drama. I resigned. The investigation found me complicit in covering up the truth. I lost my position. Carter's hand froze on the coffee pot. Because of me? Because of what I did to you, Venessa corrected. Because I chose to tell the truth 6 years too late. But it was the right thing to do. You lost everything, Carter said, and there was something in his voice that might have been concern, or might have been vindication, or might have been both. Not everything, Venessa said quietly. I lost a job, a title, money and power and prestige. But those aren't everything. You taught me that. Carter looked at her. Really looked at her. Perhaps for the first time since she had appeared in his house. She looked different now. Lighter somehow. Despite the scandal. Despite the loss. Like she had been carrying something impossibly heavy and had finally set it down. What are you going to do now? He asked. I don't know, Venessa admitted. But I'm not going to run from it. Whatever comes next, I'm going to face it. She paused. Unless you want me to leave. I'll understand if you do. Carter thought about it. About the woman who had destroyed his life, who had shown up and tried to put the pieces back together, who had sacrificed everything to make it right. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. It was real. Stay, he said. The word surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. For Matilda, she likes having you here. And, he added, his voice rough, I'm getting used to coming home to a clean house. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was a door left open instead of slammed shut. And sometimes, that was where things had to start. 1 year later, Carter Finn stood in his kitchen. The same kitchen where he had found Venessa Hart scrubbing the floor at midnight, and marveled at how different everything looked. The house was still small, still shabby, but it felt like a home now. The kind of home that had laughter in it, and warmth, and people who cared. He had been offered his old career back, a position at a different company with the understanding that his record was clear and his reputation restored. The salary would have been life-changing. The title impressive. The security everything he had dreamed about for years. But when Matilda had heard about it, she had asked him a simple question. Would you be happy, Daddy? And Carter had realized the answer was no. He didn't want to go back to glass towers and corporate politics and the life that had once seemed so important. He wanted to work with his hands. He wanted to be home for dinner. He wanted to be present for his daughter in ways he hadn't been before everything fell apart. So he had turned down the offer and started his own small business, doing electrical work and repairs, making enough to be comfortable, choosing his own hours, his own clients, his own life. Venessa had been there through all of it. Not as a CEO, not as someone with power or money or connections, just as someone who showed up, who helped, who became, slowly and improbably, a part of their lives. She had taken a job teaching business classes at a community college, work that paid a fraction of what she used to make but gave her something she had never had before. Purpose, that wasn't about profit. Connection, that wasn't about climbing. She still came by the house several times a week. She had dinner with them. She helped Matilda with homework. She and Carter had long conversations about everything and nothing. The kind of conversations that happened between people who had been through something terrible together and come out the other side changed. They weren't together, not in any romantic sense. Carter wasn't sure he could ever fully forgive her, and Venessa wasn't sure she deserved it if he did. But they were something. Friends maybe, though that word seemed too simple. Co-survivors. Two people bound by a shared history of hurt and healing, trying to build something better from the wreckage. Daddy, Vanessa's here, Matilda called from the front door, her voice bright with excitement. She was 8 now, taller, more confident, still the same gentle soul, but with a lightness that hadn't been there before. Carter looked up from the sink where he was washing vegetables for dinner. Vanessa came into the kitchen, casual in jeans and a simple shirt, her hair pulled back, carrying a bag of groceries. She looked so different from the woman who had knelt on this floor a year ago, broken and desperate. She looked like someone who had found her way back to herself. "I brought stuff for pasta," she said with a small smile. "Since I know it's Wednesday. You don't have to keep bringing groceries," Carter said, but there was no heat in it. They'd had this argument before. "I know," Vanessa said. "But I want to." Matilda took the bag and started unpacking it with the ease of routine. Carter and Vanessa moved around the small kitchen in the comfortable silence of people who had learned each other's rhythms. And as Carter watched his daughter laugh at something Vanessa said, as he felt the warmth of this simple, ordinary moment, he realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It wasn't a grand gesture or a dramatic declaration. It was this. It was showing up. It was time. It was choosing, day after day, to build something instead of holding on to the rubble of what had been destroyed. He still remembered the pain. He probably always would. And Vanessa still carried her guilt, the knowledge that she could never fully undo what she had done. But they had learned to live with those things, to acknowledge them without letting them define everything. "I'm glad you're here," Carter said suddenly. Vanessa looked at him, something vulnerable and hopeful in her eyes. "So am I," she said quietly. And in that moment, in that small kitchen in that shabby house, Carter Finn felt something he hadn't felt in 6 long years. Not happiness, not exactly, but something close to it. Peace. What? The sense that maybe, just maybe, they were all going to be okay. Later that night, after dinner was finished and Matilda was in bed, Carter and Vanessa sat on the front steps of the house, watching the neighborhood settle into darkness. It was a ritual they had fallen into, these quiet conversations in the space between day and night. "Do you ever regret it?" Carter asked. "Everything you gave up?" Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. "I regret what I did to you," she said finally. "Every day. But giving up that life? No, I don't regret that." She looked at him. "That person I was, the one who could sign away someone's life to protect her career. She was drowning. She just didn't know it. Losing everything was the only thing that could save me." Carter nodded slowly. He understood that better than she probably realized. He had drowned once too. And sometimes the only way back to the surface was to let go of everything you thought was keeping you afloat. "What you said that first night," Carter said. "In the kitchen. Do you remember what it was?" Vanessa's expression grew pained. "I remember every word. Tell me again." She looked at him, surprised, but she didn't refuse. "I said, I destroyed your life. And your daughter's. And there's nothing I can do that will ever make that right." "That broke me," Carter said quietly. "Not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. And because you knew it was true. And you said it anyway." He paused. "That's when I knew you weren't here to make yourself feel better. You were here because you had to be." Vanessa's eyes glistened with tears. "I'm still here for that reason." "I know," Carter said. And for the first time, he reached out and took her hand. Not a romantic gesture, but something simpler and more profound. An acknowledgement. A bridge. "And I'm glad you are." They sat there in the darkness, 2 people who had hurt and been hurt, who had fallen and climbed back up, who had learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do was also the most necessary. The past couldn't be changed. The damage couldn't be fully undone. But the future was still unwritten. And in that possibility, in that fragile, imperfect hope, there was something worth holding on to. Inside the house, Matilda slept peacefully, surrounded by love she didn't fully understand, but felt in every corner of her small world. And on the steps, 2 adults who had once been on opposite sides of an unforgivable act found a moment of quiet understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet. but the beginning of something that might, someday, look like it. And in the end, perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was all any of them could ask for. To face what had been done. To do better. To build something new from the ruins of what had been destroyed. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And for Carter Finn, for Venessa Hart, for little Matilda who held them both together, it was home.